thank you guys all so much for coming on. This was a Greg Louder exclusive. I was talking to Greg and Alan. I said, we need some new topics for Best Made Weddings. And Greg had suggested tents and outdoor kind of situations like that. And I don't know anything about that at all. And it's something that, but I think that we are going into this like a lot of couples do, where I don't know. A lot of times we talk about like photography or, DJ stuff, and I kind of know a little bit. I think this is interesting today because I'll be learning kind of alongside everybody about, what do we need to know about these sorts of things, when to book your tent, are we doing what different sizes, locations, all the kind of stuff that I'm sure questions that I don't even think about asking right now. So Mallory, why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll go to Scott and then we'll get into this.
Yeah, so I'm Mallory Bailey. I used to be a wedding planner and now I am a project manager for CORT Party Rental and specialize in like the mid to high level weddings with like a $5K to $250K budget.
Awesome. And Scott, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm Scott Alexander. I'm the current owner and president of Alexander Party Rentals. I grew up in the tent rental industry, second generation owner of a tent rental company. We do a lot more than just weddings, but we definitely focus very heavily on tented wedding events, and it's a big part of what we do.
It's interesting to think about, and obviously where you've grown up in it a little bit, but like at what point I'm going into the tent rental business. Like it does seem like something that is certainly necessary, right? But it is an interesting, how everyone, professionally, I never thought I would be a wedding videographer either. So how did you talk about that just first off? I'm fascinated about that.
Ooh, so I went to school for molecular biology, actually. So I had a degree in a completely different field. I think it just happened that I graduated like in the trough of the recession, which was 2009. And my parents were definitely struggling and needed some help. And we found success running the business together. And I decided as it grew and I learned a little more about it, that it was actually something I wanted to do as a career, and decided to fully take it over in 2014.
Awesome. And Mallory, where you came from, the other side, right? And do you feel like you running the rentals and the behind the scenes stuff now, having kind of gone through that whole world for a long time, you really have seen both sides of the coin, right?
I have, yeah. So before I was a wedding planner, I also worked at different venues, from small like boutique hotels to like large corporate convention center hotels. So having been the client in multiple different aspects is super helpful when helping clients plan, because there's a lot of things that they don't know they need. So being able to be like, have you thought about where your catering tent's going to be? Oh, didn't know I needed a catering tent. So it is very helpful with clients and couples.
Well, good. I think we got a good, between you guys today to walk through some of this stuff. I think, especially in the Pacific Northwest, weather-wise, so dependent, having tents, are we doing the ceremony outside? And then also, we were talking before we recorded about everything going on now with regulations with the numbers of peoples and things and COVID regulations, trying to extend out spaces to be able to accommodate whatever. So I think it's going to be a good timely discussion today, but I think also it should last, hopefully a while just in terms of what we need to know. We joked before we started, the number one question that people should know, when should I book my tent? Right. And you guys both joked, last month or whatever. So I guess, Mallory, we'll start with you on that and then we'll continue the conversation. If someone's thinking about doing that, I guess, is that the first question? When do you book, or how do you know? I guess if I'm looking at the venue, how do I know if that's something I even need to consider if I'm a couple planning the wedding?
Yeah. So a lot of the couples that come to any rental company really that need tents, what I have seen is a lot of people at their own home. And so it's really building from the ground up at a private residence or sometimes in the middle of a field in Eastern Washington. There are many venues as well that people add tents to, just sheer capacity reasons. But I think the first thing they usually ask after getting a quote is, when should I book? And always telling couples and clients that as soon as possible, because of labor. Tents are very labor heavy. And so making sure, depending on the size of the tent, if someone just needs like a smaller tent just for their catering, that could go up in an hour or so. But if someone needs a tent that holds 200 people plus their food and dancing, and they want a floor and power and HVAC and everything, it could be a multiple day project. So being able to make sure we have the right labor on the books for them is crucial.
Scott, is it something to think about? I guess nowadays you have so many venues that maybe have a tent, or it's a small tent, or they don't. Like Mallory's talking, in the backyard. What are you guys finding now in terms of just being called to come out to places to accommodate that? Is it common now that most venues aren't set up for that and you guys have to bring in everything? I mean, what do when people are looking for venues, is that something they need to consider? Like, oh, we can add a tent anywhere. We don't have to worry, in terms of like, finding the right venue that also can accommodate that.
Right. So specifically with venues, it's going to vary by venue. We work with a lot of venues that specifically have set up their grounds around adding tents. And some venues do own their own tents that they're going to put up for the season. Many don't do that because it can kill their grass or kill just the greenery that makes the venue what the venue is. But I'm sure that CORT, as well as our company, we've worked with many venues where we have very specific footprints for tents that work very well for the size events that they do there, and also reduce the impact on their grounds and make a very clean install for the bride and groom. So I definitely work with your venue and your rental company and make sure that they're talking with each other and have that good communication.
Yeah. Do you find that most of the time, I guess we'll go to Mallory and then Scott, that most of the time is it the couple connecting you with the venue, or are you guys already talking with them? How does that work in terms of the dynamic of making sure everyone's on the same page?
I really think it goes both ways. A lot of times we're getting the venue giving our contact information to the couple and saying, reach out. They know the venue well. And if it's the reverse, then that is usually one of the first things we as rental companies would ask is does this fit at the venue? If we, as my company, if we've never been there before, we'll go out and we'll do a site visit. We'll meet the owner, meet the manager to make sure we can actually put a tent there. Because sometimes people just think, oh, I could just put a tent in their parking lot, and a venue says absolutely not.
Yeah, Scott, is that something too that you guys, if you haven't been, especially if it's like a private residence, that you guys have to go out and do that site visit?
Yeah, site visits are key. And every company that does what we do that I'm aware of offers those pretty much complimentary. They're really important beyond just saying, is the tent going to fit in a space? We have to look at things like, can we stake, which is the way that most tents are held down, because there's a whole safety factor with tents that we have to make sure they're not just going to be a giant kite, because that's frankly what they turn into the wind. And if we can't stake, that means we have to ballast. So we have to talk with the venue about, how much weight we can bring in and where we can put it, because it does have a footprint on their grounds. More than that, when we're dealing with a new venue, we have to know what their protocol is for load in and load out, how much time we're going to have to build a tent. Especially some of the more popular wedding venues, they may be asking us to set up someone's tent the evening before, after the previous event, and then tearing that out, same night of the event, which really puts a lot of pressure on the rental company. And that's something you really want to make sure you have talked through in advance with the vendor, just because that it may not be feasible, especially if you're only looking a month out, for us to provide that kind of labor.
Yeah, it's definitely something you have to think about. We're getting ready for this Snohomish wedding tour here coming up, and we had just got emails, and yeah, some of the vendors are loading in, Thursday, Friday in anticipation of the Sunday date, right?
Right.
And like you said, that night before or night out loadout, especially if something's going till midnight, it's not going to happen.
Days before is preferred.
Absolutely.
I remember a couple of years ago we did a wedding at Chateau Lille, and they had something like a separate tent brought in, besides kind of whatever that they have on the side there. And I think that one of the couples got a discount so that they could keep the tent up for the whole weekend, because it was easier than having to break that down in between.
Oh, yes, definitely. Can we come on Thursday, pick up on Tuesday? Great. Thank you.
So if I'm, if we decide that we need some outdoor accommodations, in terms of like scale and size and options, I mean, I'm sure it's limitless, but also limited. So I guess where does that start, Mallory? If I'm trying to figure out, what do I need? Is there a number of people? All
Mhm.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we ask couples and clients a lot of questions before we recommend a tent. So, asking first, obviously, how many people are coming? How are you going to use the tent? Are you going to have a seated dinner that's plated? Do you need to have room for a buffet? Are you going to be dancing? Are there going to be bars? Is there going to be lounge? Basically, what's going to go underneath the tent? Right now is a weird world of, are you 6 feet apart? How much spacing are we doing? Are you doing 10 people per table? Are you doing 6? Like, that's been a whole weird thing to now put into the kind of protocol of what you ask. But once all those questions are asked, and after a site visit is typically done, and what you have to work with, then from there, it's easy to figure out what size tent someone might need. So if someone thinks they need a 20 by 30, but they have 100 people in a dance floor, as a tent professional off the top of your head, that's not going to work. So providing them with a diagram to show them, well, this is how this can all fit into your tent. Um, and then telling them from there what their options are for if they did want to go bigger or smaller, what can we eliminate? What can we add on? This is how much room you have to grow if your guest count grows. And then also figuring out for them, where other tents might be in location, or what's our path here? Are we walking 100 feet down a cliff to get there? Kind of all those other logistics come with that too.
I guess, Scott, that is an interesting question. Obviously, with changing regulations all the time now, but just in general, guest counts grow and shrink when it comes to any wedding, right? Even in normal times. And so, is it something where you're over? If I'm a couple, am I over guessing size, and then we can always downsize just the number of people inside, or how does that work to not end up with this massive space that maybe isn't filled properly?
Right. So I always recommend that clients book a tent that's for their largest guest count that they would anticipate. So however many invitations they're sending out, minus the typical 20% probably of attrition, that's normal. It's pretty easy to normally shrink a tent. The tents are modular, and we can just kind of take a mid out, and your 40 by 60 went down to a 40 by 50 or something like that. It's a little more difficult, especially when we talk about labor again and then availability. If all of a sudden you go from saying, I want that 40 by 60 tent to now you need a 40 by 120, you do that week of, and you're going to be a little bit at the whim of the tent company of what they can make happen. Certainly, I know we will do everything we can in that scenario. I'm sure CORT is the same way. We're all in business to try to rent as much stuff as we can on any given weekend, but there are limits to what we can do last minute. So I think the best advice I would have is book the biggest thing you can. And, if you start to see your guest count dwindling, tell your tent company with as much notice as you can that you think you want to, shift down.
Mallory, when you were talking about trying to figure out, bar and dance floor and stuff like that, I can't speak. Is it really kind of like you're an interior designer trying to figure out, how to best use that space? Is that part of what you guys do?
I would say so. Having been in a venue and a planner, I've done that a lot in my own career. But I think just as a rental company, it also helps you figure out what else they need and from a rental standpoint, because a lot of times people don't realize they need an actual dance floor or they need an actual bar front. So it helps us let them know what else they might need in the tent. But yeah, it really is like interior design, because also they might not know if they're not using a planner or don't have a caterer that's going to help them lay the floor plan out. They don't know how to lay it out. So they don't know what a general wedding tent setup was going to look like. So yeah, it really is like interior design.
Yeah, I also imagine that it has to do similarly with the real space with fire codes and things like that, right? And where exits. I don't even know how all that works, Scott. With in terms of like getting in and out accessibility, is that a thing that you guys have to look at?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So when we set up a tent, we have to abide by IFC, or International Fire Code. And that means we have to have a proper number of exits, and we have to provide lit exit signs, fire extinguisher normally, just things to make sure that if you had an emergency, people could egress the tent in a safe way. For most tents that are on private land, that are private events, you don't actually need to get a permit. However, I will say for couples that are considering a more public venue, like at a state park or local park, or at a major venue that's like downtown, if you are putting up a tent there, you do need to permit it, and you will be checked to make sure that your install is following IFC guidelines. And that is another thing, going back to booking, make sure you do that early, because most municipalities are going to require at least 30 days to get that tent permit done. So another thing to encourage everyone to book as soon as they can.
Yeah, I love that. I love having stuff like, nuggets like that to take away, right? So if you're going to be doing that, definitely having, the time for the proper permits and things like that is good to know. That it shouldn't be a last minute kind of decision in that way. Mallory, in terms of, ideal setup, and obviously everything, sizes and different, whatever, we talk, the Thursday setup. I mean, how long does it really take just on average to set up a tent, worst case, if we had to do it the night before or day of?
If we're talking just a tent and not everything that goes under the tent, because that adds a lot of time. I would say, if you're doing a tent for 300 people, 30 by 50, say, just the tent, maybe a couple tent accessories, 4 to 5 hours. And it also depends on, are you staking into asphalt? That might take a little more time. Are you bringing in weighted blocks? That might take a little more time. So, give and take a little bit, but that's kind of a general. If you're doing a big tent with all the accessories and all the rentals, it's almost a full day job sometimes.
12-hour day, multiple days. Depends.
And when you guys are talking accessories, like, are we talking like lights inside, heaters, things like that, those accessories?
Yeah. So a tent, what you get as a tent rental, just the tent, is a frame, a top, stakes, if you're having it staked, and the labor to set it up. Everything else is extra. So you can have so if you wanted a clear top, it's going to be more expensive. If you want a Tidewater sailcloth style tent, that's going to be a little more expensive, different labor, different style of tent. But there's things like leg drapes, walls, doors, heaters, HVAC, power, flooring, all of that, lighting, lots of different chandeliers and lighting options, tent liners. Most rental companies have a lot of different things to enhance your tent to be as sophisticated as you want. And then there's some people who they just want the frame and they just want it really for coverage or as a rain plan.
Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Mallory's on point with all of that, and trying to say tents generally take 4 hours is almost impossible, just because tents come in every size imaginable and have so many accessories. And I think it just goes back to that each wedding tent setup is really unique, just like the couple. And you really want to make sure you do a site check in advance and talk about all those options that you might want, because it may drastically change the amount of time that the tent company needs to set it up.
When we're talking about, load in, you guys are talking about weights, things like that. Obviously, if it's an established venue, maybe you guys have been there before, and maybe they're set up a little more for, load in and things like that. If I have a private residence, if like Dorothy and I are going to have a tent here in our yard, how does that work with the logistics of being able to load in? I imagine it's not a small truck, right? I have no idea. I mean, Mallory, what is that? I have no idea.
Yeah, traditionally what you're going to see is a 26-foot box truck show up to your residence. So a site visit, again, is great for, can a truck fit here? Do we need to bring multiple small trucks? Do we have to back down the driveway? Are we going, there's been plenty of places in, like Medina or Mercer Island where you have a tiny little path next to this house and there's a tree branch. It's 5 feet. clearance. And so knowing all those extra things so you can prep the team beforehand to know, okay, you're actually going to be here for 2 extra hours because of how much you're going to go back and forth. And I think too, a lot of things, if you do have to bring weights, that's some heavy stuff. So if you're having to go downstairs, you need to make sure you have strongest people on your team to be able to bring those back and forth. And sometimes there may be, very rarely, but there may be some points where you're like, I can't put this here. Like there's a place I went to one time that only had like a dumb waiter, and they wanted to put a tent on like the 4th floor and it had to be weighted. It's like, that's a lot of 100-pound weights to go up and down. So, we offered that option, but there's just things that as a rental company, you figure out, okay, I can't do this, but what else can I do to make it work?
Are you guys in this, I don't know or not, where you guys are maybe more on the front end, right? Where you're talking with the clients and, selling the things. Scott, your own, but like, do you like the logistics of like having to actually like figure out like the weights and all of that? Is that something you guys do, or is there like a engineer that does that to figures out all that sort of stuff?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, sure.
So what we are provided, so we all buy our tents from a tent manufacturer, and actually CORT and us, we use the same manufacturer for most of our tents, which is Aztec Tents. What they provide us is the amount of hold down capacity we have to provide per leg to safely install the tent. And we actually, both companies are internally deciding how much weight we're actually putting per leg, because tent manufacturers don't really design tents to be anchored with ballast or weights. They design them for stakes. So that is, it is complicated. Engineers do get involved. Kind of the typical rule of thumb in our industry is 10 pounds per square foot. But it does vary. And we certainly look at things like a couple getting married in the middle of August. How likely is it that they're actually going to have a windstorm during their event? And we'll make sure that, we provide a ballast solution that both incorporates the budget and the safety and finds, that good midpoint where we're making sure the tent is safe, but also we're not making the client pay for a winter storm grade tent in the middle of August.
It's something I guess I would never even think about. And obviously you guys are the experts, but depending on, like you were saying, the land and if it's, grass or gravel or asphalt, obviously you guys can accommodate all of that. Is that something that I need to worry about, or just know that you guys, and I'll ask Mallory that, do I just trust that you guys know what you're going to be doing? It's like, if I'm hiring a DJ, I don't have to worry about how many speakers for the size of the room, that I just trust them. Do you guys handle all that?
I would hope that you would trust us to do that. And I would say either of our companies, I feel like you should be able to trust. But I also would tell any client, ask us those questions if it makes you feel more comfortable. I'm the kind of person who's going to ask a lot of questions of, I don't know, if I'm renting something, like a car, if I have a question about something, I'm just going to ask, even if I think that they're a trustworthy company.
Scott, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that covers it. Make sure your tenting company knows what they're doing.
Make sure they're certified rental company.
Yeah, exactly. That they're following industry best practice. If they can't give you some sort of formula for how they're calculating, weight or any other safety factor, that might indicate to you that they're not quite sure what they're doing. So.
One thing I want to ask about is, I guess, deciding if you need a tent or not in terms of like weather and stuff. So I remember, Dorothy and I got married down at Salty's, and I think when we got married there, they had like an option that it was something, they had, and it's like, you could just pay, and it was whatever it was that was set for that size or whatever. But we had to know, like, I think they said 10 days before or something, because they, to add that on and do whatever. If I'm getting married in August and I'm worried about the rain, but I don't want a tent, but if we have to have a tent kind of deal, I guess we'll go to Scott first. How does that work? Are we reserving something? Is there a drop dead date? I don't know. How does all that work? If we don't want a tent, but we, might have to have one.
Sure. So kind of the rain insurance plan is what you're talking about. And most tenting companies do have some sort of reservation policy just because there is a lot of labor and planning that goes into setting up these tents. I mean, what we do is really like light construction, and we have to have people that are knowledgeable, that know how to set these things up on staff and on hand for your event. So most companies are on like a 2-week cancellation policy. So that should give you enough time to really say, okay, do we think weather's going to be nice enough that we want to forego this tent or not? We certainly, when clients decide to cancel within that 2 weeks, we'll try to cut it down based on the labor that we're not having to do anymore. But we still, as a company and as an industry, we have to recoup some of that cost of reserving that item. So know that there is some cost to trying to just have a rain plan.
Yeah, Mallory, I saw you kind of light up when I started talking about this too. What are your thoughts on this?
I think Scott said it correctly when he said it's a rain insurance plan. It is the best insurance that you can get, especially when you're getting married in the Pacific Northwest, because I mean, there have been so many days where we sit in the office on Monday and the rain says it's gonna, or the weather says it's gonna rain on Saturday, and we get dozens of calls. Can I get a tent for this weekend? And sometimes we can't, just sheerly because operationally we're already so busy. Obviously we don't like to do that, but there's just times when you just don't have the capacity to do it. Sometimes people are really flexible, but if you're at a venue where you have to be in the same day and out the next day, you might not be able to do it. So it really is the best insurance a couple can get for their wedding if they know they're going to be outside. If you don't have an option to go inside, you really do need a tent.
No, I 100% agree with that. Scott, add on to that and I'll give my thoughts because you're obviously know more about this.
No, I agree completely. Don't take the risk. If you're at an outdoor venue, you're going to need a rain option because you don't want to be the one who caused grandma to sit outside in a thunderstorm with nothing covering her. Or worse, on a 110 degree or 105 degree day. We're in Washington and people are just baking in the sun. I've been at a couple weddings where people didn't get tents and, they're holding napkins above their head for shade. You have to think that there is more than just, the once in a, decade storm that might cause your wedding to be a little bit of a disaster without some sort of coverage.
Yeah, a lot of people do forget about grandma and how hot it can get. It's very true.
Well, is that, I guess, to segue to that is, obviously people think about rain when it comes to tents, but obviously, like you guys were talking about heat and stuff too. I mean, it doesn't even need to be that hot, right? I mean, we're joking, but it could be 80 degrees and you're really, to be sitting out there for an hour. Do you guys find as many calls for that or how does that, when people are worried about, inclement weather, I guess to call it?
I think the people who are worried about it being sunny are the people who know they want a tent. I think the people who are worried about it being rainy are the people who are like, well, should I book it? Do I need to do it now? It really, Scott, I feel like you might feel the same way, but I feel like that's really going to be how people's idea of what they should get a tent for is really kind of how it goes.
Scott, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think just going back to what we were saying, you really need to think about all types of weather. It's not just rain. There's potentially lots of heat, and think about that also with like the style of tent you're getting. Like you might really want a clear top, but putting that up in the middle of August, you're going to want a lot of fans and you're going to need cooling to go along with the tent in that case, which is going to add to your cost. And maybe it makes more sense to do a white tent in that circumstance. Certainly both our companies can accommodate either way, but you're also kind of putting up a greenhouse if you're getting that clear tent.
And you want to make sure the homeowner knows that the grass might die a little bit.
That too. Yep.
What do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you put a clear top up and it's over a beautiful lawn and it's up for 3 or 4 days, and it's 80 degrees, it could burn some grass. So, and I mean, clear tents are stunning. They are one of my favorite kinds of tents. You can make them look so beautiful, but I do always preface that potential, because you don't, as a rental company, you don't want someone to come back and be like, you burned my lawn. And be like, well, it's a greenhouse.
Yeah.
And also it'd be a lot hotter, like Scott was saying, with the clear top. I would, it's
much hotter.
It just that at that point we're trying to maximize light, keep rain out, but not.
Yeah, it's actually worse than not having a tent at that point, because that clear fabric is letting all that light energy in and then holding that hot air in. So it's much worse. I've seen it where, like, you put up a clear tent on a lawn and you'll actually cause all the water vapor in the lawn to evaporate, which then hits the tent top, fogs it. And so you just have this very hot, moist, humid interior event space. So try to avoid that.
So it's part of your molecular biology that
Yeah.
you're getting a science lesson today.
Background coming in.
So, I mean, you guys, it's obviously client choice, but do you try to talk people out of the clear tent then? I mean, because I'm just thinking from a, video photo perspective, having that clear tent is obviously going to feel a lot more open and let in more light, but it seems like there's a lot more downsides. Am I wrong, Scott?
I don't think it's really talking them out of it. I think it's more of just making them knowledgeable of what they're renting. So it's the same as in the wintertime, it could snow, it could be icy, and just letting them know all of the things about how a tent is going to react in different weather situations, and their responsibility as the renter, if it does rain, if it does snow, if it is really hot in there, just making them aware of it, because clients don't know what they don't know about tents, and we do, and that's what we're here for. So I wouldn't say it's tucking them out of it. It's just making them as knowledgeable as possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't talk anyone out of a clear top, because, like Mallory, I also love clear tops. I think they're gorgeous tents. They're really fun to decorate, and they can really bring out the Seattle skyline. That said, I think there's ways to mitigate the problems around them, like making sure you're ordering fans if you're thinking that you want a clear top on a hot day, or even full HVAC. You can also do things like, instead of doing your entire tent clear, you do like select panels clear. Our tents are modular, and you don't actually have to have just a top that's entirely clear or entirely white. We can do panels in certain positions, so that, like, right over where your ceremony is going to be is that clear top, so you get that look for those stunning photos. But then you do have a white panel for over grandma, like we were talking about before, so she's not burning to death while you're getting married. There's always options, and I think it's just going in knowing that these tents, really, we can customize them to your event needs and the logistical needs of what's going on.
I don't want to say anything or I don't know if this is a dumb question or whatever. So when it comes to, like, if I'm getting married at a venue, right, and I assume like the venue's got some insurance, right, wedding insurance, things like that. If I'm getting married, like if we're doing it in our house, if that tent comes, if it does rain, if it collapses, if the wind blows, whatever, do I need to have insurance and this might be a bigger discussion for, stop me if I'm whatever, or is that come with the tent, or how does that work if God forbid something horrible happened in the tent, something happened to it? Does that make sense, my question?
Yeah.
Scott,
do you want me to
go
jump
for it.
in? Yeah. Okay, so you should definitely get event insurance if you're hosting a big event. I recommend that. Beyond just a tent collapsing, someone can slip and break their arm at your event, and family can be only so close sometimes. So don't think they won't sue you just because they're family. I've heard that story many times. If your tent falls down during your event, your tent company has done something very wrong, is the first thing I will say. I have been doing this pretty much my whole life, about 20 years now, setting up tents, and I have never seen a tent collapse at a wedding. So I think your best insurance in regards to the tent is making sure that you are booking with a reputable company that knows what they're doing. I think one thing you will need to have with your tent company is a disaster evacuation plan. So if the weather really did turn, and we're talking a storm where we're getting like 50-mile-per-hour plus winds, then you're going to want to be considering evacuating and not hosting your event that day or moving indoors. Tents are designed to protect you from things like rain and the sun. They are not inclement weather shelter, which means do not seek to, shelter from a major storm in them.
Mallory, anything to add?
I think what Scott said is correct. And he's right on the money there. I mean, I've had people ask, what do I do if it's a lightning storm? I'm like, well, you're in a metal frame, so please evacuate. So I think our company has kind of just, here are all the things that you should do in different weather situations that we supply to people, especially if we know that the weather's bad. I mean, Scott, I'm sure your company was the same with during COVID and having like restaurant tents and different tents and stuff up constantly, and like, it's supposed to snow, it's gonna be icy, here's what you should do. So I think a reputable rental company is going to make sure that there is a plan in place and that you're aware of something that could happen, and how to handle it.
Is that a concern with people using the right companies and using reputable ones? I mean, I've heard you guys, talk about that, right? And that's a valid concern. I deal with that all the time, but like videographers, running off or doing whatever. I mean, are there companies that are not properly equipped or are selling things that they shouldn't be when it comes to this sort of thing? Mallory?
I mean, I'm sure that there are. I know we work a lot in partnership or in collaboration with other larger companies in the Pacific Northwest, and across the nation, really. And so, I mean, the ones that I know that we talk to are definitely reputable and up there. But I know that there are little smaller companies that I'm sure that they're great as well. I may not know personally what their background is. So I think it's just like really looking at, what their history is like, having communication with people who've worked with them in the past to really, truly, say if they're a reputable company.
Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, check Google reviews, obviously, for reputable companies. I'm not going to out any company on here, for instance.
Yes.
But there certainly are some companies that simply don't have the knowledge of how to safely set up tents and set them up. So I think it goes back to, talk with your rental company and make sure they're asking these questions of you. If they're not, educating you on any of the things you've heard on this podcast, then that's kind of a red flag that they're not thinking about the safety of your event.
Do we have to do is there damage deposits and things like that when you guys are setting up, and how does that work if we're like hosting it like on our private land or versus a venue? I mean, does that change anything? Like, do we have to pay a retainer if something gets damaged, or how does that work?
So most companies in the industry, and I'll speak mine and CORT, so Alexander Party Rentals and CORT, we both charge a damage waiver fee, which covers kind of the typical wear and tear and damages that happen in an event. Things like an accidentally dropped glass. When it comes to tents, it would be like the tent wall getting damaged because it, was put too close to something or flapped and started to shred. The only things that doesn't cover is things like theft, gross negligence, like someone went and untied our tent in the middle of the event. We're not going to cover damage at that point. What's another one? Or vandalism. That would almost be vandalism in that case. And it's not insurance, just to be clear. The damage waiver that we offer, we're not an insurance company. We can't sell insurance. It is there solely as a buffer between you and a damage that could be a lot greater than that charge.
Mallory, anything to add on that?
Nope, that's exactly right. And I've seen the damage waiver be so incredibly helpful for people before. And a lot of times, that we obviously do more than tents, but sometimes you don't know when a waiter is going to drop 300 gold rim champagne flutes, and then you have to pay for all of them because you didn't do the damage waiver. So I've seen it be incredibly helpful because you have no idea what's going to happen at your event because you're not the only one there.
Yeah, I mean, I could just see, especially if you had to leave something overnight and maybe you got families. If it's, I'm just thinking all these private event things and people are setting up and a candle burns something or I don't, you know what I mean? I always think of this and here you've left this immaculate, expensive tent, on someone's property somewhere. And it's like, Lord knows what's going to happen to that. I'm always kind of curious how that works out. I want to go back to the rain stuff a little bit because we started derailing on that. Is there anything else specifically that we want to make sure we touch on today that I haven't asked about yet?
Yeah, I would say another thing that some people should consider, especially if it's during a rainy season, so like April, March, I mean, really May, June. But if you have a tent and it has walls, you can still get rain going underneath the walls. So do you need to have a floor? Are you on some sort of property that might get soggy when it's rainy? We've seen people have to add floor last minute because it was a downpour, and just so adding that layer of just a little more protection, really, because a wall is made of canvas. PVC, different materials. It's not actually like a canvas bag, but we call it
plastic.
Canvas. Yeah, this is plastic, but and it doesn't it goes all the way to the ground, but water's going to get through. It's not a wall. Some of the tents that my company owns, we are able to do like hard walls and glass walls, but still, if you want the full benefits of being able to protect the ground and your guests, adding a floor is a really great way to protect yourself, safety, and it also just adds a nice upscale sophistication to a tent as well. It really makes it a venue.
Yeah, I would have to imagine it feels a lot more, even more so substantial than just having that. Scott, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely echo what Mallory said. Floors are essential for some events in our area, especially if you're trying to create a full venue in your backyard. And floors are their own animal. It's not just like there's one flooring option. Both our companies offer both what's called a contour floor, so a floor that's going to follow the slope of your backyard or whatever ground we're putting it on, or a fully leveled option where we're actually creating a perfectly flat surface for you to host your event on. And there's a difference in price, there's a difference in labor. And they really will change the feel of your event from that backyard setting to all of a sudden you've erected a temporary structure and venue in your backyard. So we get into what I think we in the industry kind of refer to temporary structure rental at that point. And it's a different animal.
Yes, it is. Those are those you need multiple days, sometimes weeks on site.
Yes. That is not a done in 4-hour job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, because that was kind of because when we were talking about the rain stuff, and obviously where you guys are both larger scale anyway, but my question was, we were talking about, getting the tents and all that. At the end of the day, is it a problem with inventory or is it just having the time to set it up and the manpower or man and woman power to set it up? I mean, is it what is the issue when it comes to trying to add stuff last minute or do it? Is it purely just like we don't have the time to put this together? Mallory?
It's normally manpower for our two companies, I would think, especially in season. We both have a lot of inventory when it comes to tents. And both our companies, I think, will pretty actively just order in another mid if we needed one to make sure that we could do an event. I think, our area is just labor is really hard to get. And kind of go back to things we were touching on to begin with, like this year, labor is even more difficult and the demand on our companies is even more intense. So we lost 2 competitors this last year in wedding tents, which means, the companies that have survived, we're trying to do even more with the limited labor we already have. So definitely book early.
And it's
also specialized labor too. Like you have to really put the time and effort and to learn how to erect these tents safely. And, you can't just be hired one day. And I mean, you can go train for a couple weeks, but you can't be a lead on a tent install if you've never done it before.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that because I think we had talked at the beginning how, tents can be used right now to extend, restaurants or whatever else just to add more seating anyway. So there's just more demand right now across the board anyway, just because you guys might have your inventory part of other things. Am I saying that right, Scott?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, I think both our companies are probably still waiting to see exactly where it comes out during COVID, because this has been a pretty crazy, 12 months for our industry. But I think what we're seeing this year is it's just there's this huge backlog of weddings that were going to happen in 2020 that didn't, that have now moved to this year. And I mean, you're just seeing this with venues where they're booking, not just Saturday and Sunday, they're booking Friday, Thursday as well on events. And the same thing is kind of happening with wedding tents. And I think the business that we aren't doing, which would be like more of the really big scale events like festivals and corporate stuff, because very few people are trying to get 20,000 people together right now. Those normally require a different type of tent than a wedding tent. So I think there's going to be more of a crunch in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Mallory, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I have learned, obviously I don't own my company, Scott does, so he knows what is in his inventory, but I have learned, like, inventory wise, we have a lot more than I even realized. So we definitely have the capacity to do things, but having the people to do it is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could see. I guess that's a great point. Where maybe we're not doing the festivals right now, but you're doing all these little scattered, not little, but all smaller scattered ones, and it's almost more work because you're trying to, send out all these different crews and stuff.
Yeah, well, and I think too, weddings. I've seen a lot of people say, "Well, we were going to get married here, but now we're going to get married in my best friend's neighbor's backyard," and so there's a lot more demand to have that outdoor, open air, but covered event this summer. And it's like July, August, September. So everybody is like, well, maybe not June yet. I think things will go and be better by July. So there's still people who are pushing things because we're not quite there yet.
And October gets a little too rainy.
So there's like 3 months in 2021 where it's Scott and I are going to be not sleeping.
Very busy. First 2 weeks of October can normally be okay, but I don't recommend waiting till like the Halloween time. There's some cold days then.
It's going to be intense.
Literally.
And that's my one tent joke we made it the whole time without any tent puns. This has been great. We successfully navigated a almost hour-long roundtable discussion about tents. I appreciate that. I think you guys have done well. Anything else that I always ask that Dummy Reed isn't thinking about to ask when it relates to what's going on?
I would say, on top of also doing a site visit with your rental company, is also visiting their showroom, seeing what else they have. My company has 2 showrooms, and I know Scott has a great showroom down in Kent. And so we're in Everett and Fife, and just going and seeing what else you can do and all the other things you can add to really enhance your event. Is a great way also to, find out more about the company that you're going to be working with, or the different companies that you're going to be, sometimes people use multiple rental companies for things. So I think make sure you visit the showroom.
I think that's great. Especially too, because I mean, how do you visualize, any of that stuff? And then you can see all the options, right? Like lights and stuff and different drapes.
Yeah, you could put your table together, your tabletop together. You could, if you're meeting with a person that you're working on the tent with, you can sit and look at diagrams together and kind of make your whole event at that point as well.
That's great. Scott, any other advice or suggestions?
I think we covered everything I had. Certainly stop by and see our showroom. We'd love to see people again. It's been a while since we've seen people.
Come say hi.
Love to show you what we can do in person as opposed to just on Zoom. But otherwise, just, yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate no, and I think one interesting thing about this podcast is to take things that people just take for granted. I show up and everything's ready to go, right? And here, all the work that goes into that and the questions and the time and everything else. I think is important, not only for couples, but also for other vendors that are in this. I know that we have both couples and vendors that listen. And so I think both sides can benefit from learning a lot more about, each other's industries and things like that. So I've been, Greg succeeded today. I needed the topic, and Greg Louder said that this would be good. Let's do final goodbyes. I'll put everything in the notes too. But Scott, if people want to learn more about you and your company and everything you offer, where would you have them go?
I think to the website. Definitely, it's the modern age. The website is going to have more information than anything we can provide. In an email. The other thing that I would suggest you do is, if you're planning on having a tented event, get an idea of what you want before you call us. Get an idea of the style you're looking for. Go on Pinterest and just see what's possible with tents, because they really are unique to each event, as I said, and unique to each couple. You can do a lot with them. Really, your imagination is the limit. So ask us what you're hoping to do, and I'm sure one of our companies can make it happen for you.
And your website's alexanderpartyrentals.com.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. And Mallory, what about you?
Yeah, well, I would echo what Scott said about having an idea of what you want for a tent when you reach out to a rental company, or, working with your planner and figuring out what that vision is. But you can reach us at CORT, which is CORT, partyrental.com. And then we're also CORT Party Rental across social media platforms too. So our Instagram and Facebook and all those things.
Perfect. I really appreciate you guys coming on. I mean it. And I think this is good and helpful information. So, hopefully we'll all have a stunningly successful wedding season here coming up. We'll see how, hopefully we'll open up a lot and there'll be not a lot of rain. So thank you guys again for coming on.